Welcome and thank you for listening to the Sales Maven Show. I'm your host, Nikki Rausch. I'm your own personal sales maven. I'm here to offer you tips and strategies and techniques to master your sales conversations. All right, we're going to be talking today about why people buy from you and the hidden currency but behind trust. Trust really is a hidden currency, and rapport is how you accumulate trust. So I have some questions to get us started. When is the last time you bought from somebody who wasn't the cheapest price in town? Or have you recently bought from somebody because they came highly recommended from somebody you trusted, even if you didn't know them yet? Or last, have you ever bought from somebody just because you felt like I can trust this person? Chances are you've had these situations and maybe one or two came to mind and made you think of like, oh yeah, I've done that. The kind of the issue is that most people think buyers make decisions based on price, expertise, visibility. But really, in my experience, people buy from people they can trust. And you might have heard this saying before, it's the know, like, and trust factor. And you have to create the know and the like in order to build the trust. And the know and the like really starts to come from rapport building. And that's really kind of what we're going to get into today. Because if you're struggling to create trust with people, chances are you're not taking the time or the effort to build rapport with them. And the thing about this is, buyers, before they're making decisions, they're not saying like, are you the best? They're saying, can I trust you? They're going to ask that question before they ask, like, how good are you at what you do? So you want to think about, kind of comes down to risk, right? Like we all have to make risk when we're making purchasing decisions or when we're agreeing to go along with somebody's recommendation for us. There's risk involved in that. And risk is that thing that if people feel like the risk is too high, they're going to walk away. And there's always risk involved. There's financial risk, there's emotional risk, there's time, there's reputation, right? But when there's trust involved in that relationship, the perceived risk goes down. I had this situation that came up recently with one of my private coaching clients. There was a situation that she brought to my attention, and she was asking for some suggestions on what to do in an upcoming meeting to essentially have some more influence in the conversation. So, as she was explaining this situation to me, one of the things that I start to look at, and this really is kind of how I look at kind of all client interactions, is I'm always thinking about how is this going to land for their client, for my client's client, right? Or for their customer, or for their potential buyer. What is that going to do to the relationship? And it really comes down to a lot of times is there rapport in that relationship and is there trust? So I'm always looking for ways to build rapport. I'm looking for ways to build trust in the communication. And so even though my client came to me asking about, what to do in the meeting itself, I am taking a step back and going, actually, there are some things that we can do prior to the meeting to start to accumulate rapport that is going to lead to trust. And so we completely shifted and I made some recommendation on what should be in that like first kind of email to prep their buyer for the meeting. And it was really all about building rapport. So there was some structure to some language that I had suggested in there. And and I will say my client was a little bit nervous, like she's not sure how this is going to land. This isn't normally how she communicates with this client, but she was willing to trust me and and kind of make a change. And then, of course, we did prep for what to do once she got to the meeting, how to shift some of the language patterns, how to form really thoughtful questions. And what were some of the questions that needed to be asked? And after the meeting, she came back and she was so delighted. She was like, this was one of the most successful meetings I've had with this person. And she even referenced that she could tell that some of the heavy lifting was done prior to the meeting even taking place. And this is such an important distinction. So you may have heard me talk about on this podcast before, or if you're a client, I'm sure you've heard me talk about when I think about relationships, I think about that I have a rapport bank account with everybody I come into contact with. And I think about this as well from my client's perspective is that they have a rapport bank account with the person that they're interacting with. And every single interaction with another person, you're either making a deposit in that rapport bank account or you're making withdrawal. And so I'm always looking for ways to make deposits on my client's behalf, on my own behalf, right? Because I also know that we're human. I'm definitely one of those people that I make missteps, I make mistakes. Sometimes I break rapport unintentionally with people. So I also know that if I have a balance built up in that rapport bank account, they're going to give me some grace. Doesn't mean they'll give me a lot of grace. And it depends on, how big of a mistake it is. But often, when you've done some of that heavy lifting up front and made some deposits in that account, one little withdrawal isn't going to close the relationship. Oftentimes, people make withdrawals before they have a balance, and then that will cause that relationship to be finished, right? There's no second chances. But when you think about rapport deposits, think about what are some of those things that do like turn out to be deposits. Being a good listener, asking thoughtful questions, being curious, following through on the things that you said you were going to do, and respecting boundaries. These are all really prime opportunities to start to accumulate a balance in your rapport bank account. Now, let's also look at what are some of the withdrawals that come. Being pushy, making assumptions. This is one that so many people, even me, we're all guilty of this. We make assumptions that really require big withdrawals from our rapport bank accounts with people. We talk over people. We forget to follow through on something, right? Like we start treating people like transactions. These are all big withdrawals. A big one for me that causes big withdrawals, and oftentimes it happens early in a relationship, is people no showing for meetings. Now, have I ever no showed for meetings? Yes, we all make mistakes, right? But recently, I just had somebody no show twice for a meeting and then reschedule it twice. And then after that, like I was done. I'm not even interested in getting on a call with this person at this point because they're just making withdrawal after withdrawal after withdrawal. And frankly, like I'm willing to like give them some leeway and being in the red with me. But after four like big, what felt like big withdrawals, it's like, no, we're not going to even continue the conversation. There's no purpose for it here. So you want to think about those things. It is so important that you follow through. And even if you do make a misstep, that you acknowledge it, that you apologize, and that you do better next time, right? Like you don't no show for two meetings and then be like, well, you can just reschedule it here, which is basically what the person did. And I was like, wait, me? I'm supposed to reschedule a meeting you no showed for? I have to do the work. That feels like an imbalance in the relationship. That feels like a big withdrawal. Okay. So I mentioned this idea that trust oftentimes is built before you need it. So just like with my client situation, that the message that was sent prior to the meeting already did a lot of the heavy lifting. It started building rapport. So when the person got to the meeting, they were so much more receptive. And there were some things that we did in this message. So one was to build rapport. The other was to create safety for the other person that was on the receiving end of the message. So build rapport and create safety. That allowed for the meeting and the prep that was done for the meeting to just run so much smoother. And again, when I have a client that's coming back to me going like, Nikki, you just always know what to say, which is a super nice compliment, but also just frankly not true. I don't always know what to say. What I do know is I think about the relationship and I think about the interaction and how can we make deposits in the rapport bank account? Are there things that can be done that sometimes take just really minimal effort on the part of my client or on the part of me that sets the relationship up for success? And really, selling gets so much easier and relationships get so much easier when you start thinking about these things. So here is my challenge for you this week, if you're willing to accept a challenge. I want you to think about the next important conversation that you're going to have this week. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be a sales conversation. It could be with somebody who is important to you in your life, somebody who you want to start to build relationship with, right? Like you can decide, but I want you before you go into that conversation, be thinking about what are some things that you're going to say or things that you're going to discuss or things you're going to do when you're together with that person. And then take a step back and ask yourself, will this create a deposit in my rapport bank account with them? Or will it possibly create a withdrawal? And if it's going to create a withdrawal, or if you're not sure, then there's more work to be done, right? I would caution you from going into that meeting without doing a little bit more either soul searching or find a resource to help you with that conversation or with that situation. Because again, at some point, enough withdrawals causes that account to close, right? They'll close that bank account and they won't give you the time of day to try to like bring it back. So ask yourself that and then decide what could you do differently and what can you do to make a deposit. This idea that, trust can be built before you need it is so true that you can build trust with someone before you have to make an offer. You can do it, before you're ever asking them for a referral or an introduction. When you find yourself in a negotiating situation with them, trust can actually be built prior to that. So every interaction is an opportunity for you to make a deposit. Not every single interaction is an opportunity to earn somebody's business, right? Doesn't mean that you're going to close on every one of those interactions. You're not going to close in every email that you send. You're not going to close in every conversation that you have with somebody, but you can actually be thinking in every one of those interactions, am I making a deposit? Or is there something that I'm doing that's causing there to be a withdrawal? And you want to start building up your balances. All right. So that's this episode for you, this idea of trust currency and how you can accumulate that is by thinking about rapport. You may have heard me say this. This is one of my philosophies about selling: rapport first, relationship always. All right. Wishing you continued success. As always, thank you so much for listening to the podcast. And if you have a comment about this particular episode, or if you want to share what is something that you did this week to make a rapport deposit,